Elena's Revenge. Prepare yourselves, because when Elena Silvera decided to reveal the truth, no one came out unscathed. Imagine the scene. The most luxurious gala in Madrid, 300 members of the high society elite, and a powerful businessman who believes he has deceived his wife perfectly. But she discovered everything 6 months ago, and tonight she hasn't come just to dance. What happened on that stage was so devastating, so perfectly calculated, that it became a legend in Madrid's high society. This is the true story of how a woman transformed her greatest humiliation into the most elegant revenge ever seen. Ricardo Molina adjusted his bow tie for the third time in front of the Venetian mirror in his office. The reflection staring back was that of a 50-year-old man at the peak of success. Graying hair perfectly combed, an impeccable Italian suit, and a smile that had already won dozens of million-euro contracts. But today, something different shone in his brown eyes, an anxiety he rarely allowed to show. The Esperanza Foundation Gala was the most important social event of the year in Madrid. Businessmen, politicians, celebrities, and high society would gather at the luxurious Hotel Ritz. Ricardo had sponsored the event for the last 5 years, always accompanied by Elena, his wife of 22 years. But this year would be different. His fingers delicately touched the golden invitation on the mahogany desk. 2 invitations, actually, one addressed to Mr. Ricardo Molina and Mrs. Elena Molina, the other, simply, to Mr. Ricardo Molina and guest. The second had arrived discreetly through his private secretary, with a handwritten note that just said, "So we can make our union official before society. With love, Isabella." Isabella Carvalho. The name resonated in his mind like a seductive melody. At 32, she was everything Elena had ceased to be. Vibrant, passionate, full of dreams and ambitions. Marketing director for a competitor's firm, she had entered his life 6 months ago during a business conference in Barcelona. What began as a professional attraction quickly transformed into something much more dangerous and overwhelming. Ricardo remembered that first meeting perfectly. Isabella had aggressively questioned his strategies during a lecture, forcing him to defend his viewpoints with a passion he hadn't felt in years. After the event, she approached to apologize, but in her green eyes, he didn't see regret, but defiance. They had dinner together that night, and Ricardo discovered that he hadn't spoken to someone who truly intellectually stimulated him in decades. Elena, on the other hand, had settled into the role of a high society wife. Her days were reduced to charity lunches, spa sessions, and supervising the renovation of the country house in Segovia. Her conversations revolved around social gossip and complaints about the staff. The love they once felt had transformed into a cordial domestic coexistence, only interrupted by arguments about investments and social commitments. The phone rang, interrupting his reflections. It was Isabella. "My love." Her voice had that velvety quality that always made him forget where he was. "Are you ready for our big night?" "Isabella, we need to talk about this." Ricardo hesitated, looking at the framed photo on his desk, where Elena smiled beside him during a trip to Paris the previous year. "I'm not sure it's the right time to—" "Ricardo," she interrupted him gently but firmly. "We talked about this yesterday, and last week, and last month. You said you were tired of living a lie, that you wanted to assume our relationship publicly. It was you who suggested I accompany you to the ball." It was true. During a moment of passion in her apartment, after a particularly harsh argument with Elena about his constant absence from home, Ricardo had declared he was ready to leave the marriage and start a new life. Isabella had radiated joy, talking about how they could finally be happy together without needing to hide. But now, with the ball only 2 hours away, reality was knocking at his door like an unpaid bill. Elena wasn't just his wife. She was his silent partner, owner of 40% of the company's shares. His lawyers had already made it clear that a divorce could be financially catastrophic. Furthermore, Elena came from one of the most traditional families in Madrid, the Silveras, whose political and social influence had opened many doors for his businesses over the years. "Are you coming to pick me up at 8? Isabella's voice brought him back to the present. "Of course," he replied, his voice sounding more confident than he felt. "Wear the blue dress we bought in Paris. You'll look stunning." After hanging up, Ricardo walked to the window of his office on the 22nd floor. The city of Madrid stretched out before him, a sea of lights beginning to twinkle with the approach of night. Somewhere down there, Elena was getting ready in her suite, where she had spent the afternoon at one of the city's most expensive spas. She had mentioned during breakfast that she would wear the Valentino dress they had bought in Rome. His mind flew back 3 hours to when Elena had called him to confirm if he would pick her up at 7:30. Her voice sounded strange on the phone, colder than usual, but he had attributed it to the stress of preparations. Elena always got nervous before important social events, worried about making the right impression. What she didn't know, or at least what he hoped she didn't know, was that for the last 6 months, Ricardo had built an elaborate web of lies to keep his relationship with Isabella a secret. Invented business trips, fake meetings, even a reserved office where they could meet discreetly. Everything carefully planned so their two lives wouldn't cross. Until tonight, Ricardo looked again at the 2 invitations. A decision needed to be made. He could continue living the lie. Accompany Elena to the ball as the exemplary husband all of Madrid society knew, and meet secretly with Isabella another time. Or he could finally have the courage to own his true feelings, even if it cost him everything he had built. His cell phone vibrated with a message from Isabella. "I can't wait to dance with you in front of everyone. It will be our first dance as a real couple." Then, almost immediately, a message arrived from Elena. "Darling, I changed my mind about the dress. I'm going to wear the gold one you said was your favorite. I want to be perfect for you tonight." Ricardo felt cold sweat run down his back. Elena never showed that kind of attention to his desires regarding clothes. In fact, she rarely asked his opinion on anything related to her appearance. Something was different, but he couldn't identify what. His reflections were interrupted by the arrival of his chauffeur, Carlos, who knocked discreetly at the door. "Mr. Ricardo, the car is ready." "Where are we going first?" The question echoed in the office like an ultimatum. Ricardo looked one last time at Elena's photo, then at his cell phone, where Isabella's message still shone on the screen. Finally, his eyes rested on a third photo he kept in a locked drawer. A photo of Isabella smiling during a weekend they had spent together in Segovia when Elena was visiting her mother in Seville. "Carlos," he said finally, his voice firm but loaded with consequences. "Let's pick up Ms. Isabella first, then proceed to the ball." The chauffeur nodded and withdrew. Ricardo remained alone for a few more minutes, knowing he was about to cross a line from which he might not be able to return. But for the first time in months, he felt truly alive. He had no idea that Elena had discovered Isabella 3 weeks ago, thanks to a private investigator hired to confirm her suspicions. Nor did he know that his wife had spent the last few days meticulously planning her own strategy for the night of the ball. And certainly, he didn't imagine that at that exact moment, Elena was in her own car, following a carefully calculated route that would ensure she arrived at the ball a few minutes after him and his companion. The game had begun, and all the players were positioning themselves on the board. The public revelation. Do you think such a betrayal can be forgiven? Comment your opinion. The main hall of the Hotel Ritz had never looked so dazzling. Austrian crystal chandeliers hung from the ornate ceiling, casting golden reflections on tables covered with French silk tablecloths. Over 300 guests circulated through the room, a parade of designer dresses and impeccable tuxedos. As a chamber orchestra played classic waltzes, Ricardo adjusted his shirt cuff for the 10th time in 5 minutes. Beside him, Isabella radiated elegance in a petrol blue dress that embraced her curves sublimely. The neckline was discreet, but daring enough to attract admiring glances. Her brown hair was gathered in a sophisticated bun, highlighting the diamond necklace he had given her the previous month. "You're nervous," she observed, gently touching his arm. "Relax, love. This is our night." Ricardo forced a smile. Since they had arrived 20 minutes ago, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched with more attention than usual. Several acquaintances had approached to greet them, and although they maintained the usual cordiality, Ricardo perceived a speculative glint in their eyes. Elena's absence was being noticed. "Mr. Molina." The strident voice of Marta Silvera, one of the event organizers and Elena's distant cousin, cut through the air. She approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What a surprise to see you here with such a young and charming companion." "Marta," Ricardo replied with practiced diplomacy, "I would like you to meet Isabella Carvalho, marketing director at Carvalho and Associates." "Isabella, this is Marta Silvera, one of the pillars of our charitable society." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Silvera." Isabella extended her hand gracefully, but Ricardo noted the almost imperceptible tension in her voice. "The pleasure is mine, dear." Marta shook the offered hand, her eyes examining Isabella from head to toe. "And Elena, is she not coming tonight?" "What a pity. She loves this event. In fact, it was she who suggested this year's theme." "Elena is indisposed," Ricardo lied with ease, a skill he had perfected in recent months. "A terrible cold. She insisted I come anyway, since we are the main sponsors." "Ah, what a pity indeed," Marta murmured, but her tone suggested anything but pity. "Well, I hope she recovers soon. We will give her your regards, of course." After Marta walked away, Isabella turned to Ricardo with a worried expression. "She knows," she said in a low voice, "by the way she looked at me. Ricardo, I get the impression that everyone here knows." "You're imagining things," he replied, but his own confidence was wavering. "Let's dance. That will help you relax." The dance floor was moderately full, couples spinning in an elegant waltz. Ricardo led Isabella to the center, and she surrendered to the music with a natural grace that caused several couples to stop and admire them. For a moment, Ricardo allowed himself to forget his worries and simply enjoy the sensation of holding Isabella in his arms publicly. It was then that he saw her. Elena was standing at the main entrance of the hall, talking to the maitre d'. She was wearing a gold dress that Ricardo didn't recognize. Not the Valentino she had mentioned, but something new, more daring, that highlighted her still slender figure at 48. Her blonde hair was loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders, and she was wearing the family jewels, the diamond tiara that had belonged to the Silvera women for 3 generations. But what caught Ricardo's attention most was her posture. Elena didn't look like the betrayed and humiliated wife he had imagined. On the contrary, she radiated an almost regal confidence, as if she were the true hostess of the event. "What is it?" Isabella asked, feeling him stiffen during the dance. "Nothing," he murmured, trying to keep Elena in his field of vision without being obvious. "Keep dancing." Elena finished her conversation with the maitre d' and began to walk through the hall. She wasn't alone. A tall man with gray hair and an impeccable tuxedo accompanied her. Ricardo recognized him instantly. Dr. Alejandro Montenegro, one of the city's most respected lawyers, and, coincidentally, a specialist in corporate law. Ricardo's stomach contracted. Why would Elena be accompanied by Montenegro? And why did she look so triumphant? The music came to an end, and Ricardo led Isabella off the floor. He needed fresh air to think clearly, but before they could head to the terrace, Elena appeared before them like a golden apparition. "Ricardo, darling." Her voice sounded melodious, almost joyful. "What a surprise to find you here." The anger Ricardo felt was like a punch to the stomach. There was his wife, elegant and smiling, while he was accompanied by his mistress in front of 300 people of Madrid high society. "Elena," he managed to stammer. "I thought you said you were sick." "Ah, yes," she laughed, a crystalline sound that attracted the attention of several people nearby. "Fortunately, I recovered in time. I couldn't miss the ball, especially not tonight." She turned to Isabella with a radiant smile. "And you must be Isabella Carvalho. I've heard so much about you." Isabella paled visibly. "Mrs. Molina, Please, call me Elena," she interrupted kindly. "After all, we are practically intimate, aren't we? Ricardo tells me everything about his work meetings." The double entendre was unmistakable, but said with such elegance that no one else, besides the three of them, could have noticed. Ricardo felt cold sweat run down his back. "Elena, we can speak in private," he whispered urgently. "Later, darling. It wouldn't be appropriate to abandon our guest now." She turned back to Isabella. "You look beautiful, dear. This dress is a unique piece, isn't it? I recognize Madame Dubois' work. Ricardo has impeccable taste for gifts." Isabella unconsciously touched the diamond necklace on her neck, and Ricardo realized with horror that Elena had noticed the gesture. "Ah, and this necklace?" Elena continued, her voice still sweet as honey. "It is absolutely stunning. It must have cost quite a bit." Ricardo was always generous with his special collaborators. At that moment, Dr. Montenegro approached the group. "Elena, dear, forgive the interruption." He offered a cordial smile to Ricardo and Isabella. "Ricardo, a pleasure to see you, and you must be Mrs. Carvalho, whom we hear so much about." "Hear so much about?" Ricardo repeated, his voice sounding strange even to him. "Oh yes," Montenegro smiled. "Elena told me about the innovations you are implementing in the company. Very interesting, I must say." Ricardo looked from Montenegro to Elena, trying to decipher what was happening. His wife maintained a serene expression, almost innocent, but he knew that glint in her eyes. It was the same glint she had when securing an advantageous bid at an art auction. "Well," Elena announced suddenly, "I think it's time we do what we came to do." "What you came to do?" Isabella asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elena smiled, and for the first time that night, Ricardo saw a glimpse of the woman who had married him 22 years ago. Determined, intelligent, and completely ruthless when necessary. "Because didn't we discover it together?" Elena made a discreet signal to the maitre d', who immediately headed to the stage where the orchestra was. The sound of the instruments ceased gradually, and all conversations in the hall lowered in volume. The maitre d' delicately tapped a crystal glass, calling for general attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice echoed through the sound system, "we have the pleasure of inviting Mrs. Elena Silveira de Molina to the stage for a few special words." Ricardo's blood ran cold. Elena never gave speeches at social events. She always left that part to him or other organizers. "Excuse me," Elena said sweetly, touching Ricardo's arm. "Duty calls." She walked toward the stage with the grace of a queen, leaving Ricardo, Isabella, and Montenegro in a silence loaded with tension. Around them, guests positioned themselves to get a better view of the stage. On stage, Elena delicately adjusted the microphone and smiled at the audience. The spotlight made her diamond tiara shine like stars. "Good evening, friends." Her voice rang clear and confident. "First of all, I would like to thank all of you for being here today, contributing to such a noble cause as the Esperanza Foundation." Polite applause echoed through the hall. "As many of you know," Elena continued, "my family has a long tradition of philanthropy in this city, and tonight I would like to announce a new chapter in that tradition." Ricardo felt his legs shaking. Whatever Elena was planning, he was sure it wouldn't be good for him. "Starting today," Elena announced, her voice gaining strength, "I will personally assume the presidency of the Esperanza Foundation, and to fund our new projects, I will have the pleasure of making the largest individual donation in the foundation's history." Murmurs of admiration spread through the audience. 50 million euros, Elena declared, and the hall exploded in enthusiastic applause. Ricardo felt as if he had been struck by lightning. 50 million euros was practically the entire joint account he and Elena kept for personal investments. How could she have access to that amount without his signature? And now, Elena continued, when the applause died down, "I would like to invite a very special person to join me on stage, a person who has been fundamental in certain recent changes in my life." Ricardo's heart stopped completely. "Isabella Carvalho, could you come up here, please?" The entire hall turned to look in the direction where Ricardo and Isabella stood. Isabella was pale as a ghost, her hands trembling visibly. "Go," Ricardo whispered urgently. "We have no choice." With hesitant steps, Isabella walked toward the stage under the curious gazes of the entire Madrid elite. Ricardo remained where he was, feeling as if he were witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Elena extended her hand to help Isabella up to the stage. Her smile never wavered. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "I would like you to meet Isabella Carvalho, an extraordinary woman who changed my perspective on many things." Ricardo closed his eyes, preparing for the worst. Beside him, Dr. Montenegro observed the scene with professional interest. "You see," Elena continued, "Isabella taught me a very valuable lesson about the importance of honesty in relationships, and because of that, tonight, I decided to be completely honest with all of you about some important changes in my life." The hall was in absolute silence, every person hanging on every word. "After 22 years of marriage," Elena announced with a clear and firm voice, "I am divorcing my husband, Ricardo Molina." The impact was immediate. Murmurs of astonishment echoed through the hall, and several people turned to look directly at Ricardo. He felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. But Elena hadn't finished. "And also, tonight," she continued, "I would like to announce that, as part of the divorce settlement already filed, I will assume total control of Molina and Associates, since I own, through my family holding, 65% of the company's shares." Ricardo's world crumbled completely. 65%? That was impossible. He owned 55 shares, Elena 40%, and the employees the rest, through a profit-sharing program. "As some of you perhaps do not know," Elena explained calmly, "in the last 6 months, I discreetly acquired the employees' shares, in addition to an additional package that my husband had, inadvertently, placed as collateral for some undeclared personal loans." Ricardo remembered with horror the loans he had taken to maintain his secret apartment and fund his expensive gifts for Isabella, loans he had secured with his own company shares, thinking he could pay them back quickly. "But do not worry," Elena smiled radiantly at the shocked audience. The company will continue operating normally under new management, and I am sure everyone will understand that this was a very difficult decision, but necessary for my emotional well-being. She turned to Isabella, who was standing beside her like a marble statue. And now, Isabella, I would like you to say a few words to our guests. After all, you played such an important role in this revelation. The silence in the hall was deafening. 300 members of Madrid high society seemed to have forgotten how to breathe, their eyes fixed on the drama unfolding on stage. Isabella was motionless, as if she had turned to stone, while Elena maintained her serene smile, waiting for an answer. Isabella began, her voice barely coming out of her throat. The microphone caught the fragile sound and amplified it for the whole hall. I don't know what to say. Oh dear, Elena replied with a venomous sweetness. I'm sure you will find the right words. After all, you were always very eloquent in your private messages. Ricardo felt the blood drain completely from his face. Private messages. Elena knew about the messages. He looked around desperately seeking an exit, but he was surrounded by familiar faces, observing him with a mixture of shock, morbid curiosity, and poorly disguised pleasure at another's misfortune. Elena, no! Ricardo's voice resonated through the hall, louder than he intended. All eyes turned to him, and he felt as if he were naked before the crowd. Ah, Ricardo! Elena waved cheerfully in his direction. How good that you spoke up. Why don't you come up here too? After all, this is a family moment. The last thing Ricardo wanted was to go up on that stage, but the social pressure was overwhelming. Hundreds of eyes watched him, waiting for his next action. With steps that seemed stuck in mud, he walked toward the stage. When he arrived next to Elena and Isabella, he could see up close the complete transformation of his wife. The woman he had known for more than 2 decades had disappeared, replaced by someone cold, calculating, and absolutely implacable. Perfect, Elena murmured to him, before addressing the audience again. Now we have all the main characters gathered for the finale of our little play. She turned her attention to the phone. Let's see. Here is a particularly interesting message sent last week. My love, I can't wait to get rid of this farce of a marriage. Elena is just an obstacle between us and our happiness. Soon, we will be free to live our love openly. The hall erupted in stifled murmurs. Ricardo closed his eyes, wishing the earth would open and swallow him. And here, Elena continued mercilessly, we have an equally touching response from Ms. Carvalho. Ricardo, you are the man of my dreams. I can't stand having to hide anymore. When you finally get rid of that cold and calculating woman, we can be truly happy. Isabella let out an audible sob. Tears began to stream down her face, smearing her carefully applied makeup. Cold and calculating woman, Elena repeated, savoring every word. Interesting description, considering that cold and calculating woman was the one who built half the business empire you two were so eager to enjoy. Dr. Montenegro, who had remained discreetly at the foot of the stage, chose this moment to speak up. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his professional voice cutting the tension. I apologize for the interruption, but perhaps it is appropriate to clarify some legal aspects of the situation. Elena nodded gracefully. Please, doctor, I think our guests would be interested in knowing the technical details. Montenegro walked up to the stage and stood next to the microphone. As Mrs. Elena Molina's lawyer, I can confirm that all legal proceedings have been duly filed this afternoon at the provincial court. The divorce petition includes the division of assets according to the partial community property regime, in addition to the dissolution of the business partnership. He paused, allowing the information to be absorbed by the audience. Furthermore, he continued, due to certain tax irregularities discovered in Mr. Molina's personal accounts, including undeclared loans and the misuse of corporate resources for personal purposes, the tax agency will be notified on Monday for a full audit. Ricardo's world crumbled completely. Tax irregularities? Corporate resources? He had been extremely careful to keep his extramarital activities separate from the company finances. Or, at least, he thought he had been. "Dr. Montenegro," Ricardo managed to say, his voice coming out like a croak. "May I know specifically what irregularities you are referring to?" Montenegro smiled coldly. "Of course, Mr. Molina. I refer to the 200,000 euros transferred from the business account to fund the apartment on Serrano Street, registered in the name of a shell company. Also, the undeclared expenses on jewelry, travel, and other gifts acquired with corporate cards for clearly personal purposes." Ricardo felt his legs weaken. How had Elena discovered the apartment? He had been meticulous in hiding that property, using an offshore company he had created years ago for other investments. In addition, Montenegro continued, inexorably, there is the matter of fraudulent contracts with the company Carvalho and Associates, where invoices were issued for fictitious consulting services to justify the transfers of resources to personal accounts. Isabella paled even more, if that was possible. "What contracts?" she whispered. "Oh dear." Elena addressed her with false compassion. "Didn't you know? Your beloved Ricardo created fake contracts between his company and yours to justify the payment of over €500,000 in the last 6 months. Money that, coincidentally, was used to fund the luxurious lifestyle you two enjoyed." "That's a lie!" Ricardo exploded, finally finding his voice. "Those contracts were legitimate. Isabella provided real consulting services." "Ah, yes," Elena laughed, a sound that chilled the blood of everyone in the hall. "Consulting services? Is that what they call it now?" She went back to the phone and started swiping the screen. "How interesting. Here is a message from you, Ricardo. My love, the 50,000 consulting contract was approved. Now we can take that trip to Paris you wanted." And Mrs. Carvalho's response, "Ricardo, you are perfect. I can't wait to celebrate in our special apartment." Ricardo's anger transformed into panic. If Elena had intercepted his messages, she knew everything. Every meeting, every intimate moment he had shared with Isabella. "How?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How did you find out?" Elena smiled, and for the first time that night, her smile seemed genuine. "Oh, Ricardo, did you really believe I was the settled and clueless wife I pretended to be? I knew something was wrong months ago. Your constant absences, your increasingly elaborate lies, the unexplained expenses." She walked around him like a predator, circling its prey. "So I hired a private investigator, and what interesting discoveries he made, not only about your relationship with Ms. Carvalho, but also about your creative interpretations of tax legislation." Ricardo looked desperately at Isabella, seeking some kind of support or solidarity. But she was clearly in shock. Tears ran freely down her face. "Elena," he tried one last strategy. "We can resolve this in private. There is no need to involve all these people." "All these people?" Elena looked around the hall as if she only now remembered the audience. "Oh, but Ricardo, these people are our family, our friends, our business partners. They have the right to know what kind of man you really are." Dr. Montenegro cleared his throat discreetly. "Mrs. Elena, perhaps it is appropriate to mention the amicable separation agreement we offered Mr. Molina." "Ah, yes," Elena agreed. "How absent-minded I am. Ricardo, even after all these unpleasant revelations, I am still willing to be generous." She turned to him, her expression becoming almost maternal. "You can keep 10% of the company, enough for a comfortable retirement. You can also keep the beach house and the apartment where you were, consulting with Ms. Carvalho." "And in exchange?" Ricardo asked, although he already feared the answer. "In exchange," Elena replied softly, "you will sign a full confession regarding the tax irregularities, assuming full responsibility. You will also agree never to get involved in the Silvera family businesses again, nor attempt to contact any member of our family." "And if I refuse?" Elena's smile turned glacial. "Then, my dear, you will pass the next 5 to 10 years explaining your creative actions to the tax agency and the prosecutor's office. And Ms. Carvalho will have to explain her participation in the fraudulent contracts." Isabella sobbed audibly. "I didn't know," she said, her voice cracking. "I swear I didn't know the contracts were fake." "Oh dear," Elena addressed her with a compassion that seemed almost sincere. "I believe you. That is why I am offering you a chance to redeem yourself." "What chance?" Isabella asked, clinging to any hope. "You can testify about Ricardo's participation in the creation of the fraudulent contracts. In exchange, your company will receive total immunity, and you will be able to continue your career without major problems." "No!" Ricardo exploded. "Isabella, don't listen to her. We can fight this together." Isabella looked from Ricardo to Elena, and then to the crowd of faces watching them. Finally, her eyes rested on Dr. Montenegro. "If I testify," she asked hesitantly, "what will happen to Ricardo?" "That will depend on him," Montenegro replied diplomatically. "If he accepts the agreement, the consequences will be minimized. If he decides to fight—" He left the sentence in the air, but the implication was clear. Elena returned to the microphone, addressing the audience once more. "Friends, she said, her voice returning to a cheerful and confident tone. "I know tonight has brought some unexpected revelations, but I want you to know that life goes on, and goes on very positively." She paused, allowing the suspense to build. "I would like to announce that starting next week, Molina and Associates will be renamed Silvera Holdings, returning to its family roots. I am very excited to work with all of you in building an even more prosperous future." Hesitant applause began to echo through the hall. The Madrid elite were clearly divided between shock and admiration for the masterful way Elena had orchestrated the entire situation. "And now," Elena announced, "I think our special guests would wish to retire to discuss the details of the proposed agreements." It was a polite but unequivocal dismissal. Ricardo looked one last time at the crowd of familiar faces, knowing that his life, as he knew it, had ended that night. Some looked at him with pity, others with curiosity, but most simply seemed relieved not to be in his place. "Let's go," he told Isabella, offering her his arm. It was the least he could do after dragging her into this catastrophe. When they stepped down from the stage, Dr. Montenegro followed them discreetly. "There is a private room reserved for our conversation," he informed them. "I suggest we take advantage of the rest of the night to resolve all pending issues." As they left the main hall, Ricardo heard Elena take the microphone again. "And now," her voice echoed behind them, "how about we return to the celebrations? The orchestra will offer us a special waltz, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of this memorable night." The music resumed, and gradually the murmur of conversations returned to the hall. Madrid high society had witnessed one of the most spectacular scandals in its history, and could now enjoy the pleasure of analyzing it in detail over the coming months. As he walked through the gilded corridors of the hotel, Ricardo realized that his life had been completely destroyed and rebuilt in the space of 30 minutes. and the architect of his ruin was back on stage, dancing gracefully with guests as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Elena Silvera de Molina had played the final game and had won absolutely. The consequences and the final victory. Follow our story to see if Elena truly found happiness after her revenge. The private room at the Hotel Ritz was decorated with the same discreet luxury that characterized the entire establishment. Italian leather armchairs surrounded a polished mahogany table, where Dr. Montenegro had carefully organized a stack of legal documents. A service of coffee and Scotch whiskey waited on a side table, although no one showed an appetite for anything. Ricardo was sunk in one of the armchairs, still trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Beside him, Isabella cried silently, her petrol blue dress now stained by tears running through her makeup. Dr. Montenegro meticulously organized the papers, occasionally consulting his tablet. "Well," Montenegro began, his professional voice cutting the heavy silence, "I suggest we review the terms of the proposed agreement before any decision is made." "Agreed," Ricardo exploded, finally finding his voice. "This isn't an agreement. It's a mugging. Elena orchestrated all of this. She set a trap for me." Montenegro looked at him with the patience of someone used to dealing with clients in denial. "Mr. Molina, with all due respect, your wife simply utilized information you yourself provided through your actions. The fraudulent contracts, the undeclared loans, the misuse of corporate resources, all of that is documented." He opened a folder and spread several photographs on the table. Ricardo instantly recognized the images. He and Isabella entering the apartment on Serrano Street, dining at expensive restaurants, shopping at luxury boutiques. "Her private investigator was very thorough," Montenegro continued. 3 months of surveillance produced evidence more than sufficient to back all accusations. 3 months? Isabella raised her head, her makeup smeared, giving her a ghostly appearance. "She knew 3 months ago?" "In fact," Montenegro consulted his notes, "Mrs. Elena's first suspicions arose about 5 months ago, when she noticed discrepancies in the business accounts. The formal investigation began 3 months ago." Ricardo felt a new wave of nausea. 5 months? But that means, Montenegro confirmed, that she knew about your relationship practically from the beginning. And during all that time, she was patiently collecting evidence and planning her legal strategy. "My God," Isabella whispered. "All those family dinners, those cordial conversations when we met at events. She was pretending the whole time." "Not exactly pretending." A new voice echoed from the entrance of the room. Elena appeared in the doorway, still radiant in her gold dress, but now without the diamond tiara. "I was observing, studying, learning." She entered the room with the confidence of someone holding all the cards in the game. "Elena?" Ricardo stood up, a last spark of his old authority shining in his eyes. "We need to talk alone." "We have nothing left to talk about alone, Ricardo," she replied coldly, settling elegantly into the armchair opposite him. 22 years of marriage ended the moment you decided I was just an obstacle to your happiness." "You heard the whole conversation?" Isabella said. It wasn't a question, but a shocked realization. Elena smiled, and for the first time that night seemed genuinely amused. "Dear, I didn't just hear the conversations. I have audio recordings, photographs, bank statements, credit card records, and even some very intimate text messages." She gestured to Montenegro, who opened a second folder, everything meticulously catalogued and authenticated. Elena continued, "Enough to back not only the divorce, but also criminal charges of misappropriation and tax fraud." Criminal. Ricardo paled. Elena, you can't be serious. Oh, but I am completely serious, she replied, her voice acquiring a coldness he had never heard before. You stole money from our company, Ricardo. You created fake contracts. You used corporate resources to fund your extramarital life. And on top of that, you declared personal expenses as business expenses to reduce taxes. She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on his. In other words, you weren't just an unfaithful husband. You were a criminal. Montenegro cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps it is appropriate to review the options available to Mr. Molina. Please, Elena gestured gracefully. After all, I am still a reasonable woman. Montenegro organized the documents in front of him. Option 1. Mr. Molina accepts the proposed divorce agreement. He confesses to the tax irregularities and agrees to testify about the methods used to hide the diverted resources. In exchange, he will receive 10% of the company plus the mentioned properties and will avoid any criminal prosecution. And option 2? Ricardo asked, although he already feared the answer. Option 2. Mr. Molina rejects the agreement. In that case, all evidence will be sent to the tax agency and the prosecutor's office. The divorce will be contentious, likely resulting in the total loss of all marital assets, and there is a significant probability of prison. And me? Isabella asked with a trembling voice. Elena turned to her, and for a moment her expression softened slightly. As for you, dear, I recognize that you were more a victim of Ricardo's manipulations than a willing conspirator. Manipulations, Ricardo exploded. Isabella knew exactly what she was doing. Did she? Elena arched an eyebrow. Ms. Carvalho, did you know Ricardo was married when you started the relationship? Yes, I knew, Isabella admitted hesitantly. And did you know he was using company resources to fund your meetings? No, Isabella shook her head vigorously. He said the money came from personal investments and the consulting contracts your company signed with Molina and Associates. He said they were legitimate, that there was real consulting work to be executed. Elena nodded, as if her suspicions had been confirmed. Exactly what I thought. Ricardo, you didn't just deceive me. You also deceived this poor girl. Poor girl. Ricardo laughed bitterly. Elena, she knew I was married. She actively participated in the relationship. Participated in an extramarital relationship? Yes, Elena agreed. But she did not knowingly participate in tax crimes. There is a significant difference. Montenegro consulted his documents again. The proposal for Mrs. Carvalho is as follows. In exchange for your testimony on how Ricardo presented the consulting contracts to you, your company will receive total immunity from any investigation. Furthermore, Silvera Holdings will be willing to consider legitimate consulting contracts in the future. Isabella looked from Montenegro to Elena, then to Ricardo. And if I refuse? Then, Elena replied softly, you will be considered a co-conspirator in the tax crimes. Your company will be investigated, and you will likely face criminal charges. The silence in the room was deafening. Ricardo could hear the distant sound of music coming from the ballroom, where the party continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Elena, he said finally, his voice loaded with defeat. Why are you doing this? You could have just asked for a divorce. Elena studied him for a long moment before answering. Ricardo, for the last 22 years, I dedicated my life to building something with you. Not just a marriage, but a business empire, a reputation, a position in society. She stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city lights. And then I discovered that, while I was doing that, you were systematically destroying everything we built. Not only betraying me emotionally, but literally stealing the money I helped earn to impress your young mistress. She turned back to him, and Ricardo saw tears shining in her eyes for the first time that night. You turned our marriage into a lie, our company into a resource source for your extramarital relationship. And on top of that, you made me a joke to all of Madrid society. Elena, You what? She interrupted him. You regret it? You didn't know what you were doing? It was just a mistake? She shook her head sadly. Ricardo, you meticulously planned every lie, every embezzlement of money, every secret meeting. And during all that time you came home and pretended to be a loving husband. I still love you, he said desperately. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Love? Ricardo, you didn't even respect me enough to be honest with me. How can you talk about love? She returned to her armchair and sat with elegance. No, my dear. What you felt for me was convenience. I was useful for your career, for your social position, for your financial stability. But when you found something more exciting, you didn't hesitate to discard me. That's not true, Ricardo protested, but his words sounded weak even to him. Isn't it? Elena opened her purse and took out the phone again. Here is a message you sent to Isabella last week. I can't wait to get rid of Elena permanently. She is like dead weight in my life. The silence that followed was absolute. Isabella looked at Ricardo with growing horror, as if seeing him for the first time. Did you really write that? She whispered. Ricardo couldn't find words to answer. The message was true, written during a moment of particular frustration with Elena. But hearing the words repeated aloud made them cruel and despicable. I understand, Elena said softly, putting the phone away. I think I've made my position quite clear. Montenegro consulted his watch. I suggest you make a decision tonight. The agreements need to be signed by tomorrow noon at the latest for the proposed terms to stand. And if we need more time to think? Isabella asked. Then, Elena replied, the terms will become progressively less favorable. Starting tomorrow noon, the immunity offer for Mrs. Carvalho will be withdrawn. On Monday, the settlement offer for Ricardo will also be withdrawn. You want to force us to decide under pressure, Ricardo accused her. No, Elena corrected calmly. I am offering you the opportunity to minimize the consequences of your actions. But my patience and my generosity have limits. She stood up again, smoothing her gold dress. I will give you 30 minutes to discuss amongst yourselves. Dr. Montenegro will stay here to clarify any doubts about the legal aspects. Walking toward the door, she stopped and turned one last time. And Ricardo, regardless of your decision tonight, our marriage is over. The only question is whether you prefer to leave this situation as a man who at least tried to do the right thing in the end, or as a criminal who tried to fight against undeniable evidence. She left the room, leaving behind the soft sound of her dress, whispering in the marble hallway. Ricardo sank back into the armchair, finally understanding the full magnitude of his situation. Elena hadn't just discovered his betrayal. She had transformed that discovery into a masterpiece of calculated revenge. And now, he and Isabella had 30 minutes to decide how they wanted their lives to be destroyed. The legacy of triumph. Share your opinion if you think this is the perfect revenge. 6 months after the gala ball, which became a legend among Madrid high society, the office on the 22nd floor had a new occupant. Elena Silvera sat behind the same mahogany desk that once belonged to Ricardo. But the environment had been completely transformed. The walls now displayed contemporary Spanish art. Instead of masculine corporate trophies, large arrangements of fresh flowers brought life and color to the space. She reviewed the quarterly reports of the now renowned Silvera Holdings, satisfied with the numbers she saw. The company had not only recovered from the scandal, but was thriving under her new direction. The transition had been surprisingly smooth, mainly because most clients and business partners had long considered her the true force behind the company's success. A soft knock on the door interrupted her reflections. Marcia, her new executive assistant, entered with a slightly worried expression. "Mrs. Silvera, there is a person here who wishes to speak with you. She said she doesn't have an appointment, but that it is important." "Who is it?" "Isabella Carvalho." Elena looked up from the documents, genuinely surprised. In the 6 months since the night of the ball, she had had minimal contact with Isabella, mainly through lawyers during the legal proceedings that followed. "Show her in," Elena decided, curious about what could have brought her ex-husband's ex-mistress there. Isabella entered the office with visible hesitation. She was noticeably thinner, her hair cut in a more conservative style, and she wore a simple business suit that contrasted drastically with the daring elegance Elena remembered from the night of the ball. "Elena," she began, then corrected herself. "Mrs. Silvera, thank you for seeing me." "Please, sit down." Elena gestured toward one of the armchairs facing her desk. "Can I offer you coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great, thank you." Elena placed the order with Marcia, who discreetly withdrew. An uncomfortable silence settled between the two women until the coffee arrived. "Well," Elena said finally, "I imagine you didn't come here just for a social visit." Isabella took a deep breath, as if preparing for something difficult. "I came to thank you," she said, her words coming out hurriedly. "I know it might sound strange, but I need to thank you for what you did that night." Elena arched an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "Thank. Isabella, I practically destroyed your reputation in public and forced you to testify against Ricardo." "You saved me," Isabella corrected, her words gaining strength. "In the last 6 months, I've had time to understand what really happened. Ricardo wasn't just deceiving me, he was manipulating me, using me, and I was too young and stupid to realize it." She paused to take a sip of coffee, her hands shaking slightly. "When I started to really analyze our relationship, I realized how many lies he had told me, not just about you, but about everything. The consulting contracts I thought were legitimate, the expensive gifts he said came from his personal investments, even the things he told me about his feelings." Isabella looked directly at Elena for the first time since she had entered. "After everything ended, I found old messages from him on my phone, messages I had forgotten. In one of them, he said you were just a phase he needed to overcome, that he never really loved you. In another, he talked about how easy it was to manipulate emotional women like me." Elena felt a pang of something that might have been pity. "No," she continued with determination. "I need to say this. During the 6 months our relationship lasted, I thought I was living a great love story. I thought Ricardo had found in me something he couldn't find in you. But the truth is he was simply bored, and I was convenient." She stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city. "When you revealed everything that night, I felt humiliated, betrayed, destroyed. But I also felt liberated, because finally, I could see Ricardo for what he really was." "And what was he really?" Elena asked softly. "A man who respected none of the women in his life," Isabella replied without hesitation. "He lied to you for months, stole money from the company you built together, and used me as a fantasy to escape his responsibilities." She turned back to Elena. "You, on the other hand, when you discovered what was happening, didn't take revenge just out of anger. You protected yourself. You protected your assets, and strangely protected me too." "How did I protect you?" "By offering me a way out," Isabella explained. "You could have destroyed me completely, included me in the criminal charges, ruined my career. Instead, you gave me the chance to tell the truth and start over. Elena studied the younger woman's face, looking for signs of manipulation or falsehood, but finding only a tired sincerity. "And how is your life now?" she asked. "Different." Isabella smiled for the first time since she had entered. "Very different. I had to rebuild my professional reputation from scratch. Some clients abandoned me when the scandal came to light, but others respected my honesty in cooperating with the investigations." She returned to the armchair. "I also started therapy. I needed to understand how I had allowed myself to be deceived so completely and, well, I learned a lot about myself." "Like what?" "Like that I confused excitement with love, secrets with intimacy, and expensive gifts with genuine affection," Isabella replied with brutal honesty. "Ricardo made me feel special, but it was the specialness of being a secret, of being a conquest. It was never about loving me for who I really am." Elena nodded slowly. She recognized those feelings, albeit from a different perspective. "And Ricardo?" she asked. "Have you heard from him?" Isabella shook her head. "He tried to contact me several times in the first few months, but I didn't answer. I heard he moved to Seville, that he's trying to start over there, but I don't know the details, and I prefer it that way." "Did he sign the agreement?" Elena already knew the answer, but wanted to hear Isabella's perspective. "Yes, he signed it the morning after the ball. I think he finally realized he had no real choice." Isabella hesitated. "Elena, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you always know he didn't really love me? Even that night when it seemed he had chosen me to accompany him to the ball instead of you?" Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "Isabella, during 22 years of marriage, I learned to read Ricardo very well, and one thing I always knew about him is that he loved himself above all else. When I discovered about you two, my first reaction was pain and anger. But when I started investigating deeper, I realized you weren't a rival. You were just another object he wanted to possess." "How can you be so sure? Why?" Elena explained with kindness. "If Ricardo really loved you, he would have left our marriage honestly. He would have divided the assets according to the law, faced the social consequences, and built a new life with you. Instead, he tried to keep both situations, lying to both of us." Isabella slowly felt the pieces of a puzzle finally fit together. "You're right. Even when he said he wanted a divorce, there were always excuses to postpone it. It was always not the right time, or there were complications that needed to be resolved first." "Exactly." Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city. "Ricardo wanted to have the best of both worlds, the stability and social status of marriage with me, and the excitement of the secret relationship with you. He never intended to really choose." A comfortable silence settled between them. Elena studied Isabella, seeing a woman who had matured significantly in the last few months. "Can I ask why you really came here today?" Elena said finally. "I know it wasn't just to say thanks." Isabella smiled, a genuine smile this time. "You know me well, even knowing me so little." She took a deep breath. "I came to make you a business proposal." "A proposal?" "My company is growing, but I need a bigger partner for some international projects. I researched Silvera Holdings, and you have exactly the experience and resources I need." Elena leaned back in her chair, intrigued. "And you think I would consider doing business with you after everything that happened?" "I think you are a smart businesswoman," Isabella replied with growing confidence. "And I think you recognize talent when you see it, regardless of personal circumstances. Go on?" Isabella opened her briefcase and took out a carefully prepared presentation. "I am specializing my company in digital marketing for companies that want to expand into international markets. In the last 6 months, I secured 3 major clients who want to enter the European market, but I need a partner with experience in international trade." She handed the documents to Elena. This would be a strictly professional partnership, with clear and transparent contracts. Nothing like the fake contracts Ricardo created. Elena flipped through the documents, impressed despite herself by the quality of the presentation and the solidity of the numbers presented. Are these results real? Completely verifiable. I can provide references from all clients, audited financial reports, and everything you need. Elena continued studying the numbers. The proposal was indeed solid, and Silvera Holdings had been considering expanding its digital marketing division. Isabella, she said finally, do you realize how strange it would be for us to work together? What would people say? They would say that two intelligent women overcame a difficult personal situation and found a way to create value together, Isabella replied without hesitation. Or, they would say that we are professional enough to separate business from personal matters. And if it didn't work? If we discovered we couldn't work together, then we would end the partnership professionally and go on with our lives, Isabella said simply. But I think we have more in common than you might imagine. How so? We are both women who were underestimated by Ricardo Molina. Isabella smiled ironically. He thought you were just a decorative wife, and that I was just a manipulable mistress. We both proved him wrong. Elena laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. You're right. She studied Isabella for a moment longer. Then she made a decision that surprised her. Okay, I'm going to consider your proposal, but with conditions. What conditions? First, any partnership will be on a smaller scale initially. A pilot project for us to test how we work together. Agreed. Second, detailed contracts on everything, reviewed by independent lawyers. Absolutely. And third, Elena seemed to hesitate for the first time. If we are going to work together, we need to completely resolve the past between us. No hidden resentments, no unresolved awkwardness. Isabella nodded seriously. Elena, I want you to know that I never hated you, even during the relationship with Ricardo. In fact, I always admired you. He talked about you constantly. Your intelligence, your capacity for business, your position in society. I think part of what he saw in me was a younger and less threatening version of you. Less threatening? You were always his equal intellectually, capable of challenging and questioning him. I was easier to control, at least at the beginning. Isabella smiled sadly. Ironically, that was what made our relationship less real for him. Elena considered those words, recognizing the truth in them. You know, Isabella, I think you're right, in that we have more in common than I thought. We both learned valuable lessons about valuing ourselves and about not allowing men like Ricardo to define our worth. Exactly, Isabella added. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city she now saw with new eyes. Not as Ricardo Molina's wife, but as Elena Silvera, successful businesswoman in her own right. Very well, she said, turning to Isabella. Let's try this partnership, but let's do it the right way. Thank you, Elena. I promise you won't regret it. I hope not. And Elena? Yes? The next time a man tries to tell you that you are less capable or less valuable than you really are, remember this conversation. Remember that you are strong enough to rebuild your life, smart enough to recognize your mistakes, and brave enough to try something new. Tears shone in Isabella's eyes. Thank you. Well, Isabella, the same goes for you. You aren't just Ricardo Molina's ex-wife. You are a force of nature on your own. As Isabella prepared to leave, Elena reflected on how life had taken unexpected turns. 6 months ago, at the gala ball, she had orchestrated the public destruction of her marriage as an act of revenge. But what had emerged from the ashes of that night was something she had never anticipated. A stronger and more independent version of herself. "Ah, Isabella," she called when the younger woman reached the door. "Yes? I think we should have lunch together next week to discuss the details of the partnership, of course." "Of course," Isabella smiled. "But this time I pay. After all, it would technically be a legitimate business expense." Elena laughed out loud, a free and genuine laugh she hadn't emitted in months. "Accepted." After Isabella left, Elena returned to her desk and looked at the framed photo she had placed there recently. A photo of her alone, taken during a recent trip to Europe she had made to explore business opportunities. In the photo, she was smiling genuinely, free and confident. There were no longer photos of Ricardo in her office, nor in her house. Not out of anger, but because she had discovered she didn't need his presence, not even in the form of a memory, to define herself. Her phone rang, interrupting her reflections. It was Marcia. "Mrs. Elena, Dr. Montenegro on line 1 said he has good news about the final divorce process." "Put him through." The familiar voice of Montenegro sounded through the phone. "I am pleased to inform you that all final documents have been signed and registered. You are officially divorced and have total control of Silvera Holdings." "Thank you, Dr. Montenegro. It was a pleasure working with you, and I can say that I have rarely seen someone handle such a difficult situation with such elegance and determination." After hanging up, Elena allowed herself a moment of silent satisfaction. The Ricardo Molina chapter of her life had been definitely closed. But unlike the bitter end she had anticipated, she felt liberated. The woman who had entered that gala ball 6 months ago was Ricardo Molina's betrayed wife. The woman sitting in that office today was Elena Silvera, businesswoman, philanthropist, and architect of her own destiny. And for the first time in decades, she couldn't wait to discover what the future held. That night, while working late reviewing proposals for new Silvera Holdings projects, Elena received a text message from an unknown number. "Elena, I hope you are well. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I recognize the wrong I did to you, and that you were always better than I deserved. Ricardo." She looked at the message for a long moment. Then, she deleted it without replying. There was nothing more to say between them. Instead, she opened a new document on her computer and began writing a business plan for the new partnership with Isabella Carvalho. Because while the past had been about revenge and justice, the future would be about growth and possibilities, and Elena Silvera was ready to embrace them all. The new office of Silvera Holdings and Carvalho Associates occupied 2 entire floors in one of Madrid's most modern buildings. The partnership between Elena and Isabella had flourished beyond all expectations, becoming one of the most respected international marketing consultancies in the country. Elena was in her room when Isabella entered with an expression of poorly disguised amusement. "You're going to laugh," Isabella announced, waving a magazine in her hands. "At what?" "Ricardo appears in the magazine's social column." "Hello." Apparently he married a 25-year-old heiress. Elena arched an eyebrow. "The same pattern, then?" "The same pattern," Isabella agreed. "But here's the interesting part. According to the magazine, the new wife has already hired a private investigator because she suspects he is having an affair." Elena shook her head, more with pity than with satisfaction. "Some men never learn." "No," Isabella agreed, throwing the magazine in the trash. "But some women?" "Yes. And we are living proof of that." Elena smiled, looking out the window at the city she had conquered, not as someone's wife, but as herself. "Yes," she said simply. "We are."